Well, we have a number of people who have joined us already, and I expect a few more people will probably join us over the next couple of minutes, but I'll officially get us started. So on behalf of the Department of Geology, Geography, and Environmental Studies, I would like to welcome everybody to this seminar. This seminar has been titled Pathways in Agriculture because the talks will focus on current work as well as how our speakers got to their current work. And both speakers have connections with agriculture, although those connections are coming from very different directions. So this should be very interesting, both to hear from our speakers, but maybe also to make some connections we wouldn't have expected. We're dividing up this seminar into halves. So Ms. Laurie Koning will be speaking first, and each speaker will talk for maybe 10, 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. So we would very much encourage you to think of some questions and to start a conversation at that point in time. And then at the very end, as time permits, we'll continue with more question and answers after both of our speakers have finished and we finish the individual question and answer periods. I'm going to keep my introductions of the speakers brief. Laurie asked me deliberately to do that because she's going to be talking about her pathways and her background. So I don't want to steal some of that information, but I first knew Laurie as a geology major in our department, and it's just a delight to have you back with us speaking at this seminar. And Laurie is currently working as the Regulatory Affairs Manager of Pesticides and Biocides at DHD Consulting in Germany. And so we appreciate that she's here later in the evening for her, but joining our seminar series at this point in time. Because of the internet connection, I'm going to be sharing Laurie's slides. But Laurie, before I move into that, did you want to say anything to the audience while they can still see you?
Oh, no. Hello.
Or, okay, I will just go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint.
She has two screens, maybe three.
Yes, I've got two, and this was not, can you see the slide?
No.
This worked much better when I was practicing it ahead of time.
It worked perfectly when you practiced ahead of time.
It did.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
All right, my apologies for that. A brief technical mishap there. But go ahead, Laurie, thanks.
So hello everyone who has come today. I am grateful that some people are interested or you're taking part in the seminar, so you're in general interested to hear these things. I wanted to take part in this because I work as a regulatory affairs manager, and this is not something that is in checklists. When I was at the bank working on getting a loan, and he says, well, what's your job? Whew, it's not in the list of jobs. And yeah, it's also hard to find in the job databases and such. So I'd like to let everyone know that this job exists, and all sorts of backgrounds can come to this job. And first, I'd like to show you that my path has not been direct. and then I would like to explain what this job is and what it means. So I was a Calvin College, yes, Calvin College, not university, which it is now, Calvin College class of 2008. I spent time with Professor Van Dyke, Professor Sturley, and I guess you would call her Professor Higley, but I call her Melinda. And now it's what, 12 years later. Next slide. How did I get here? I live in Bad Salzdetfurt in Germany with my husband and my 2-year-old and my mother-in-law. They're all German. I'm an American. I'm employed at DHD Consulting GmbH in Hildesheim, which is just a 20-minute drive away. My job title is Regulatory Affairs Manager, and my task is to manage the authorization of pesticides and biocides for chemical companies. As a consulting company, we do not have any chemicals ourselves. We do not have any products. We work for other people. We are a go-between for the chemical companies and the government authorities. Next slide. So at Calvin, I was a geology major and a German minor. And this combination, I started with the German minor because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I took Professor Van Dyke's meteorology class, which led me into the geography, geology, environment direction, which was very good. My last year at Calvin, I worked at a company which maybe some of you still work at, I don't know, ASTI Environmental. That gave me a window into what one could possibly do with a degree in geology, in environmental sciences. I copied the reports and I filled in some tables, but I got to see that one can actually use this knowledge in a consulting job. And I would encourage you guys, if you have the opportunity, to do any sort of job while you're at Calvin, because it'll encourage you and it'll show you that what you're learning can actually be put into use. Next slide. Yeah, so I had this geology and I had German, and then Professor Bert de Vries of archaeology. I think he's also retired now. Maybe you guys don't know him, but the archaeology department. They do a January interim at Jamal in Jordan. And my opportunity was to take soil samples for a German PhD student. And then the task was to do lab work in Germany. This was fantastic, and I'm very thankful that Professor Sturley asked me if I wanted to do this, because then I could combine my geology and my German. A little bit of the idea was that I was supposed to take this lab work and turn it into a master's degree, but that didn't work out because this PhD student and the program that I got into, they weren't really focused on anything that I was doing in with the lab work, and I need a little bit more instruction. In the next slide, we see that I did a Master of Science at the Brandenburg University of Technology in Germany, and I spelled Germany wrong, but that was the Master of Science program that was recommended to me by this PhD student. It was what he had done, and I learned about soil, water, and waste in a program that was done in English, basically for international students at environment. The Master of Science degree was called Environmental and Resource Management. This was nice because it was a combination of all sorts of stuff, and it wasn't like I had to just do geology or just do and some sort of specific volcanology or something like this. I took my geology and I could learn about what does this mean for more environmental aspects. So soil, water, and waste, and what sort of things that were going on in the world. My thesis was on a fast-growing energy plant, and there was lots of greenhouse work. I turned a little bit into a gardener. In the picture, you see that I have plants. I gave them different amounts of fertilizer, and then I looked to see what best fertilizer would get them growing. But this education was a little bit too broad, maybe, and I didn't find a job that fit me. I also didn't know exactly what I was looking for, so my visa did not get renewed. And I got sent back to the United States, so to say. Next slide. I continued to look for work because I had found my boyfriend and I wanted to be back in Germany with him. So I searched and searched and searched, and I tried really hard to find some sort of job. I ended up finding a PhD project at the University of Rostock. That's up on the Baltic Sea. And there I did agricultural field experiments and field survey concerning the effect of the pesticide active ingredient glyphosate, which you guys know from Roundup. How it affects weeds and weed communities. And I spent lots of time, as you see in the left picture, hanging out in wheat fields, which was beautiful. And I also had an experiment where I was a gardener again. And then we did some lab work, because that also is part of doing experiments. And on the right, you see, some grass seeds that we had to collect from grass halms. I completed all of the project with the experiments and the data collection, and I tried really hard to get my mind around how I could turn that into a PhD with publications, but I am not the type, you could say. We were supposed to use a certain program called R to do all of the calculations, and there's a lot of programming involved with that. I have no idea about programming. And here's a hint for all of you still students. I didn't take statistics at Calvin, which I should have. So I didn't have enough background knowledge about statistics. So the PhD, I tried a couple of years, several years, but Professor Higley, she pursued it and she did it. I did not continue the race, and I gave up on that. In the next slide, we see that through the PhD program, I went to lots of conferences and I got to know different areas that are what one can do with this agricultural knowledge. And I found the presentations on the boring legal stuff very interesting. That is regulatory affairs. I am, so to say, scientific paper pusher, and I like that. The chemical companies come to us with their products, with what they want to do. And as a consultant, we work on whatever they want, and we submit whatever they want to the government agencies. But I'll go into more detail in a moment what that all means. Next slide. My responsibilities. I do project administration. I research regulatory frameworks and requirements, because not every country is the same. I monitor studies. This includes physical chemical properties like pH or how much active ingredient is in the product before and after storage for a certain amount of time, toxicity studies, ecotoxicity, and efficacy. Efficacy means, does it work? Which is a very important question. And then we do human and environmental risk assessments. This involves a lot of calculations, but there are tons and tons of guidelines with tons and tons of calculations of how you should go about doing it. which is why my weakness in math, yes, it is a weakness, but so many formulas are already given and we're supposed to do it that way that I can still make it. When I do have my difficulties, I go to our chemists and I say, please help me, because chemists are very smart people and they're glad to help me. So we also work on the dossiers, which means applications, but a dossier is everything that is involved in your application, all of the studies, all of the calculations, and we prepare these to be for the submission to the authorities. And then we do a lot of communication with customers and government agencies. And I remember the first time that I talked with a customer on the phone, it was very exciting. And yeah, now daily I write and talk with them, and government agencies. You just write to them and ask, what do I need to do? This isn't clear to me. As my boss says, the people at the government agencies are people too, so don't be afraid to contact them. You know, sometimes in when you look at job advertisements and there's these things about talking with certain people who you might be afraid of, just remember they'll work you into it slowly at your job, and everyone's a person, so don't be too concerned. You can do it. Next slide. So even though I work on pesticides and biocides, there are regulations for all sorts of chemicals. Cosmetic products, which means also hand soaps, industrial chemical substances, and animal cleaning products like a flea cleaner for a dog. And I mostly work in the EU regulation, European Union, but there's every single country in the world has some sort of system. Some of them are really developed. Some of them are not very widely, very much developed. And they say, well, if you can show us that it's registered in the United States or in the EU, then it's okay. But every country needs people like me who are taking care of this, because if you want to put your chemicals on the market, you have to go through these hoops. I don't know every single country, but I'll say I even prepared a dossier once for a customer. He wanted to submit it in Iran, and I don't know what happened with that dossier, but everyone's got a system. Next slide. We need all sorts of expertise at the company. Obviously, our company works mostly in pesticides and biocides. So for pesticides, agricultural background is very, very important. You have to know all of the different plants that are on the fields and all the weeds. But even if you don't, that's okay, because you learn what they are at the job, just like I did during my PhD. I beforehand had no idea what the names of all plants were. So you can also learn as you're doing. So don't worry, there's no agriculture program at Calvin, but if you're a biologist, then you have a little bit of knowledge about plants, for sure, but not just plant biology. As I mentioned, I have in the list here, toxicologists. Those are, in my opinion, people who have some sort of biology background and then have gone further into toxicology. Geologists, because, well, pesticides, they're being brought out on the ground. So if you have an understanding of the soil layers, that's good. And chemists are gold. We're looking to hire a new person right now, and I told my boss, I would like to order a chemist if possible. She said, I'll see what I can do about that. You can't be too picky and choosy, but chemists, they understand so much. And I would just encourage all of you, listen in your chemistry class. because it's very, very important. Next slide. Something I like about my job is that no 2 days are alike. And I know that lots of people look for that in their job. And my days aren't alike because customers come to us every day with new normal and creative ideas. And we have to then look into the regulations and requirements to fulfill their wishes. But the regulations and requirements, those don't stay the same. You have to check the websites over and over again to make sure that a country hasn't redone its system or added something new to the list. And there's guidelines that get published all the time with new information, new things to consider. And with every new product or active ingredient that we get from our customers, that's a new chemical substance with all sorts of properties that it has. So every single product is unique. And then last but not least, but we all notice recently is software is really important. Like we're using Zoom, and I've only used Zoom once before when I attended, I'll say, a conference. I just clicked on go and I listened. And there's all sorts of software for how we submit things, how we calculate things, so models. And this is constantly changing. My boss, at one time, she was up to date, and now she has her underlings, and we keep up to date on every new program because every 6 months this one program gets updated. Oh, she can't stay up to date with that. She knows the general things, but people like me, we have to use it every day and we have to stay up to date. Next slide. The level of education, and this is where I'm going to make some of you sad. Because I know that when one is done with one's bachelor, one wants to be done with school. But at least for this job, you have to have at least a Master of Science or a PhD. And this is important because when you do your master's, you learn experimental setups and how scientific reporting works. And even though I'm not doing experiments and I'm not doing scientific reporting now, I have to understand when I contract a lab to do a study, I have to understand what they're doing. And all of the reports that go into the dossiers that we write, I have to have a sense of, is this something that I can actually submit? Or is this something that, no, that's not going to work because a child did it. So sorry, you're going to have to at least do your master's if you want to do this job. Next. So I work as a regulatory affairs manager as a consultant, but you can work directly at chemical companies. I hear they might even pay more. And I put a map on the right side there, just so I just Googled chemical company Michigan. So those aren't any particular companies I chose. But through my work, I've also noticed a lot of chemicals come from Michigan. So Michigan or the Midwest is actually a great place if you want to work in the chemical industry. And there's also, to support these chemical companies, there's laboratories. So you can work directly at the lab, producing toxicology, biology, physical, chemical reports, doing the studies. But because all of these companies, they need lots and lots of data before they can apply with the authorities. You're not allowed to just get your product on the market by saying, yes, glyphosate's my active ingredient and it works. No, lots and lots of studies have to go into your application. But you can also work directly at the government. That's also an option. Or at this, so that in the United States, that might be the EPA at the national level, but you can also work at the state level, because my understanding for the United States, in my brief research one time, I think active ingredients were at the national level, but products were at the state level, something like this. So that's also an option. And they need all these different levels, specialties, people with expertise, because in order to say, yes, this is a good application or a bad application, they have to have their specialists look at the different topics. So you're all needed. Next slide. I consider this also a bit of a higher calling, because a term I used with Professor Van Dyke in our conversation a couple days ago, I like that. I'm sort of a gatekeeper. We, as consultants, we get all this stuff from the chemical companies, and we're supposed to submit it to the government agencies. But we have these risk assessments that we do, and that's sort of a first test of, is this even something that we can submit? Because we look into the safety of the humans, the animals, and the environment. And if we say, well, this doesn't pass, I mean, you could submit it, you can spend 40,000 euros if you want, but this isn't safe for humans at all, and it's not gonna go. Then they'll have to consider if they actually want to go through with their application. And we generate scientific data and studies. We evaluate data to know substance properties. In our risk assessments, we consider worst case scenarios. So even if my customer says, well, it's only usually used like this, but worst case is you use it this often and in this amount. That is what we calculate with in the risk assessment. I also carry out notifications to poison control centers. This means that I submit the entire formula information to the agencies. And then if you accidentally or on purpose consume something, and the doctor calls the poison control center, all of the data is there. And this is very important to me. And we make sure when we're working on the projects that labels are correct. So when the government agency says this and this and this, we will allow it. It needs to go on the label. Then we make sure that this and this and this also gets on the label. And also safety data sheets. I don't think people are very much aware that they exist, but this is a document, often with 10 or 12 pages, and all sorts of properties on a chemical or on a product are listed, so that you know about a product and how harmful it can be, or yeah. So one could say I help chemicals get on the market and I help pollute the environment, but part of it is I make sure that the worst of the worst do not get out there. And this helps me to feel better. Okay, next. Okay, apparently I'm here at the end, and I think that Professor Van Dyke is going to make sure that this information gets posted somewhere. She said that she would, and I have here links to various government agencies so that you can read up for yourself on what this topic is. I've got the US, EPA, Health Canada, the European Food Safety Agency, that's what does pesticides in the European Union, then the European Chemicals Agency, that is for chemicals pure, and then also for biocides. Then, because it's in English, I chose to put on here the Health and Safety Executive. That's from the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom also no longer belongs to the European Union, so you can read up on their own system of biocides if you want. I think I don't have any more slides. Yeah. Oh, I had to. Yeah. So that's what I had to say, and now we'll see what you guys have to say.
Yes, so thank you very much, Laurie. And just imagine in the Zoom environment that people are clapping and cheering in their individual rooms at this point in time. We have a bit of time for questions, and you can either, I would recommend just go ahead and unmute yourself and turn on your video if you've got a question for Laurie. And I'll also keep track of the chat if anybody has a question there. And I know it takes a few seconds for people to unmute and
Yeah.
video on. So. Well, while we're waiting, I had a question as you were talking, and I was wondering how much of your own testing does your consulting firm do, or do you rely on the client's testing or somebody else who does testing when you're putting together the information on how safe projects are or what the assessment is of them?
We don't do any testing. We only organize testing. Some companies, they have, some of the big companies, they have been studying certain chemicals since 1950s. I currently have a dossier I'm working on. They've been studying this chemical since the 1950s, and they did a lot of in-house research. And then, but most of our clients have us organize studies at laboratories. This is also a good thing because then you really know that someone else who has no interest, just like I don't care about these products, and I think my customers kind of know that. I'm not, they mean nothing to me. It's just a whole bunch of chemicals and numbers. And that's kind of what happens if you send it to a laboratory. That's just their work. And yeah, so nothing is a lie. They just report it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they probably have their professional reputation at stake if they were to make things look better than they actually are. So
yeah, definitely.
So, Laurie, I'm guessing maybe you made this explicit, but maybe I missed it. Probably a lot of your work is mandated by law, right? Probably there are a lot of regulatory laws that require a third party organization like yourself to be in the middle of all this so that they know that the judgments are impartial. Is that fair, or is that not the case?
No, they could prepare all of this by themselves. And
Oh, okay.
bigger companies, if they have the capacity to do all of this by themselves, then sure. Because just as we're taught in grade school, show all of your work.
Yep.
How do you do 1 + 1 = 2? We have to show all of our work. So if the government agency reviews the calculations and they say, that doesn't add up, then they do their own calculations and they send it back and they say, here, what you did was wrong. And so they don't need a third party like us. This is just for, yeah, if they don't have enough capacity themselves.
Okay.
Which many companies don't have the capacity themselves. They spend their money in other things, apparently.
Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Yeah.
well, in the interest of making sure that we have enough time for Luke to talk, or did I just see Melinda?
I did have a question. I was mentally in line after Ralph.
Okay.
Um,
We'll have one last question by Melinda, and then we will.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, sorry to impinge on that. I guess I was curious about the fact that, well, my sister-in-law it sounds like a job that's just like yours, actually. And she works for, well, I always say Monsanto, but I guess it's Bayer now. So I guess I'm curious if you have any relationship with like these larger companies, any affiliations at all, and what they do, and or if it's if you're doing your own thing and you have your own clients.
So as I said to Professor Van Dyke in our pre-meeting, I won't give out names of any of my customers. What I can say is, imagine a chemical company, we might work for them.
Okay. Okay, I see. No, that's great. Yeah. Okay. I can see what that means. Yeah.
We have big company customers. We have down to the smallest guy, like one-man companies.
Sure.
I've got a person from Denmark right now. He's just mixing stuff, and my colleagues say, I think he's a one-man company.
Mixing stuff.
Yeah. He's just buying like 1 liter bottles of stuff, mixing it, and yeah.
I know somebody who does this. It's called basement hydroponics. Anyways, thank you for that. I'm curious. I'm just kind of fascinated by how all these companies intermix.
That is a good thing to say. They are quite intermixed, actually. It's very weird. And we don't see through it all either. One person has this chemical, but another person prepares all the studies, and so person means company, another company gets the authorization, but then they have other companies who are actually distributing it. It's sometimes, wow. Who are we working for?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laurie. You've given us a lot to think about. And for people who have additional questions, feel free to put them into the chat for Zoom. And if Laurie's not able to stay until the end of the whole seminar, I'll make sure that the questions get to you and that we get answers later back to the people who asked those questions. So thank you again. Again, assume everybody's clapping wildly in their rooms. And while they're clapping wildly, they're also looking forward to welcoming Luke to talk with us about a very different side of agriculture, I would say, but maybe we'll hear some overlaps as well. Mr. Luke Eising is a regenerative farmer, and he works with Provision Family Farms. And again, I want to just let you tell your own story, Luke, kind of what you're doing now and how you got to this particular position. And you're currently muted, Luke.
Just waiting my turn. Are we lunch?
Go for it.
All right. So I'm from the class of 2009, just right after Laurie there. And I was that guy with the undecided major. I couldn't make up my mind, so I made an interdisciplinary major. I studied philosophy, history, and really got into international development toward the end of it. Took every elective I could find, from physics to computer programming to meteorology. And I graduated thinking I was going to seminary, but I wasn't sure that was where I belonged. So I did do 1 semester at seminary and found out that wasn't where I belonged. And I started working, as I suppose a good number of other students did. I started working in the trades, plumbing, heating, construction, things like that. And one day, as I was driving along in a truck, bringing some parts to a job site, I listened to a January series lecture. And I really have that lecture and Calvin directly to thank for pointing me in the direction I wanted to take my life. That lecture was by a guy named Joel Salatin, who's a farmer in Virginia and sort of a voice or a superstar of the regenerative agriculture movement. Now, I had grown up in agricultural areas, Iowa, South Dakota, and I had seen really big farms, and I wasn't really interested in that kind of lifestyle, and I knew I wouldn't be able to afford just getting into it anyway. But regenerative agriculture was different for me because with direct marketing, you can start much smaller. And so I started reading, and I got what I would call a second college education in the first year after this epiphany. I probably read, more than 100 books in that first year and learned as much as I could. I am kind of an infectious type, and when I hung out with my parents and tried it out on their 4 acres before launching Full Blast, they got interested too. And together we moved to a place that had 80 acres over here about an hour north of Grand Rapids. And we started doing regenerative farming at scale. And that God has more plans for me in the future too. So I went down a rabbit hole, obviously, and I'd like to just share with you what kind of things we do and what matters to us here. So I'm going to start with something a little more philosophical and then move to the more specifics. Now, we have 5 things we like to talk about on the farm: the social aspect, the health aspect, the ecological aspect, the moral aspect, and the taste part. So socially, it means we get to do local business. It means I have relationships with my clients. I often a first name basis. And it's sort of a counter proposal to today's world of Walmart and even more so Amazon. Pleasure, even if it's a little nostalgic or prosaic, in sort of knowing your local butcher or knowing your local barber, and we get that with our customers. It's not something you can quantify, but it's not something you can ignore either. Also, we get to be local in the sense that we keep our dollars within the community, and we get to support a lot of other people in our business as they support us. So that would be the sort of social aspect of what we do. There's of course a health aspect. We believe we're providing healthy food. I'm not going to stress that here, but I will say that we appear to have a sort of declining outcomes in health experiences in America right now. There's an ecological aspect, which is something I would like to talk about for a while, a little bit later. And then, of course, there's a moral aspect in that we farm animals, and we're pretty interested in how they're treated. And if you ever want to hear me talk about that, you can come to one of the January series that Professor Haltman puts on, where I get to talk about what it means to be a livestock farmer in a class on animal ethics. And then of course we like to eat stuff that tastes good. If we made really good stuff and it was really good for you and it was good for the environment and nobody wanted to eat it, it wouldn't be worth much. So we make sure we enjoy our own products as well. So down this rabbit hole of regenerative farming, I think the most important thing is that this kind of farming needs to earn some scientific legitimacy. It looks cute. It looks old-fashioned. Can you really make a living doing this? Can it really change the world, feed the world? It is a bit of a contrast to what I would term industrial agriculture, which is the kind of agriculture mostly that Laurie works for. And so I believe that that legitimacy has to be proven in some ways yet, although it's been proven to me. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit about some of our practices, more specifically what we do, and I'm going to do that through sharing some of the practices that we do that line up with what I read in this book. If you guys are interested in climate change, this was published in 2017, and it goes through 100 of what they believe to be the most practical solutions for reducing carbon emissions and improving the quality of the environment. And thank you for that, Benjamin. Let's see if we can get that in at the end. So anyway, these guys in the book sort of try to measure and quantitatively measure what could be saved from each of their solutions. And they have a section on food production because that is an important part of our climate and our environment. And I want to share with you some of the places we hit that on. They talk about farmland restoration, food waste, silvopasture, regenerative and conservation agriculture, composting, biochar, and managed grazing. Now, from this list, managed grazing is the most practical and important to me. We raise livestock, and what we do is we bunch them up very tight in groups using electric fences, and we move them, usually daily during the growing season. And what we believe we're accomplishing by doing this is we're forcing them to eat all the plants, not just the most desirable ones, and then giving those plants, that grass, a lot of time to rest. It could be anywhere from 60 days in the fall to as little as maybe 28 days in May and June. But we let the ground recover, and then we'll graze it again. And in that process, the plants build roots as well as leaf. And when they're grazed, they slough off those roots, and the roots feed the soil biology. And that soil biology eats each other, of course, and ultimately stable organic matter in the soil. And that's really how organic matter in the soil is built. That's how the organic matter built the plains of Nebraska, Illinois, Iowa, which are pretty much the most fertile large of land in the world. And it's part of what made America an economic powerhouse. It was just these huge herds of bison grazing and then moving and not coming back for 6 months or a year to the same spot. So we practice that on our farm, and we believe we're sequestering carbon. We've been able to measure that with soil tests. It took a number of years, and every year we watched as we were able to grow more grass, but it didn't show up in soil tests until about 7 years in that our carbon levels were finally increasing. Some of their other things that are important to them would be composting as a solution, and we practice a form of composting with when we winter our animals. We have them under shelters. In particular, the pigs, the cattle and sheep tend to winter outside, but we have pigs and any poultry in shelters. And what we'll do is we'll lay down a base of carbon, which for us is usually sawdust because Michigan has a lot of wood-based carbon available. We get sawdust for very cheap, delivered from local sawmills. We've also used wood chips, old hay, straw, insulation, cellulose insulation, anything that is carbon-based will work. But we lay that down, we put the animals on it, and then we continue to add to that over the course of the winter. Whenever we can start smelling the nitrogen, the ammonia, we'll add more to it. And what we get is something that begins to compost in place and provides a nice warm bed for the animals through the winter. Moreover, the composting is an active biological process that is not anaerobic, it's not putrefying, and so it creates a fairly healthy environment for them compared to a sort of water-based system where you might wash the manure away, which is more anaerobic and much less healthy for the animals. Then in the spring or in the fall, the following fall, we'll take it out with a tractor and pile it up and let it compost one more time, and then spread it on the fields, knowing that the soil biology will come up and that compost and pull it down in there through worm activity and so forth. A few other items they have on there was reducing food waste, and we like to close the loop wherever possible. One of the things we do is we go to Harmony Brewing and New Holland Brewing. We pick up their spent brewing grains and we feed them to our animals, which then enters the manure cycle and becomes part of our farm soil ultimately. I hate to see anything go waste, and so, for example, part of the carbon on our farm is we have a commercial duty paper shredder, and we shred all of our boxes and paper, which we get a fair bit of boxes in the meat handling business. We shred the excess and use it for bedding, so it can mix with that nitrogen and begin composting. So we kind of like reducing waste. Another one they mentioned here in Drawdown that we engage in would be conservation agriculture, which generally means just reduced tillage or no tillage. I do want to talk about tillage briefly because I think it's one of the most important aspects of agriculture and how it affects the environment. Humans have been tilling for a long time, but it wasn't really till the moldboard plow that we could really affect the environment to the level we do now. Is sort of like a great chance for a lot of erosion, and it exposes a lot of the soil organic material to the oxygen, which just oxidizes it away. So yeah, I am not opposed to industrial agriculture, but tillage is pretty muchly bad news. And the places that are working with cover crops and no-till planters, that's part of the future for having a healthier planet. For us, we don't really till per se, although I do some tilling, light tilling with my pigs, but we do plant cover crops and we harvest them, and we've enjoyed doing that. And finally, silvopasture was a topic I wanted to hit on. There are a lot of places in Michigan that were logged off and have come back into fairly sort of low quality forests from my perspective, very brushy, including just a mix of unhealthy softwoods like aspen, mostly around here, quaking aspen. And those kind of places are mostly used for hunting. They're not considered agriculturally valuable. To me, they are valuable. We can pasture brushland. And what we like to do is go through and take out a lot of the lower value items and leave behind enough trees to make a shade cover of less than 50%, which makes grass grow on the ground. And then we sort of get a best of all worlds by creating what I would call a temperate savanna or silvopasture. And it's cool about the silvopasture that because it's holding carbon in the trees and the tree's roots, as well as in the plants and the plant roots and the soil itself, you actually can sequester more carbon in one area than you would with either pasture or old growth forest. So those would be some of the specifics of how we farm and how they relate to this, some of the modern aspects of climate change and so forth. I wasn't really planning to talk about pesticides. When I heard Laurie's lecture, I did want to speak about where we kind of cross each other and agree and so forth. The way we look at a lot of the biocides and so forth is we see them as a tool, but it's a tool we don't really need. It's not sort of a moral evil or anything, but we found a lot of places where engaging in certain kinds of practices, we can avoid the need for biocides. And I'll give you an example for that with, say, worming animals. Now, we haven't needed to worm animals, and that's mostly for two reasons. And I'll use sheep as an example because they're highly susceptible to parasites, and they can, parasites often on cattle will cause you to have slower gains, but on sheep, it's very easy for them to die from parasites. When we started out farming, we lost a lot of sheep to not worming, but based on my research, I believed we could cull animals that were less healthy and breed the healthier ones, and they could generate a natural resistance to parasites. And I'm happy to say that although we lost half our herd of flock of sheep in the first 3 years every year, and we had to replace them, in the last 4 years or 5 years, I don't know if I've lost a single animal to worms. So part of the solution is genetics for us. The other half of the solution is management. Any animal that's given a situation where it can reinfect itself easily by grazing the same areas over and over again is going to reinfect itself. And so by rotating the animals, moving them to fresh pasture, the parasites die out before we can get back to them. Now, the reason I'm focusing on this specific example is just to show that where possible, we can use management to replace other solutions that have more drawbacks for us. And so we're always looking to management rather than infrastructure or necessarily chemicals for solutions. So just to give you a little more close up, I'll talk about some of the things I've been up to in the last couple of weeks. Give you an idea of what we're doing on the farm. Fall is really big time for us because we have to prep for winter, make sure all the animals have their correct shelters and everything's fixed up and ready to go. But it's also a big time because we tend to harvest a lot of animals. In the last few weeks, we had an on-farm butcher here a couple of times, and we slaughtered about 13 cattle. Thanksgiving is coming up. We've got turkeys to process. We do them on Tuesday, and then we deliver them Wednesday fresh to our customers all around Grand Rapids. And by the way, our marketing model mostly involves processing animals, storing them in a freezer, and then delivering them to people who order them online to the Grand Rapids and Big Rapids and Muskegon areas on a monthly trip, sort of a milk run, bringing out the product. People will just put out a cooler and we'll leave the product in it, and then they can pick it up. So yeah, I've been up to turkeys, been up to cattle, been out working on shelters, which means sometimes cutting down low value trees and then taking them back as saw logs to local sawmills and getting them made into the product I need. Yeah, that's sort of what we've been up to, wrapping the bees up for the winter, making sure they're ready. So I'm going to just do a quick recap, and then I'm looking forward to taking some questions. My story kind of begins with this young man who didn't really know what he wanted to do and found farming to be a place where I get to work physically, I get to work emotionally, investing in the land and that sense of permanence. I get to a variety of tasks, from marketing to sales to construction to, most importantly, just moving animals. It's our most important job, is simply moving animals. You know, to calculating feed rations. I've read so many scientific papers on what's in spent brewing grains, trying to make good recipes and rations. So the variety of it has been a real joy to me, because I get bored easily. And if you're the kind of person who likes to have a lot of variety in your work and likes to use both your mind and your body, and in some ways your heart as well, then I think regenerative agriculture is a place that has a bright future for you. Anyway, I started with that, and it became a farm, and this is what we do, and we really love it. So yeah, I'd like to take a few questions now.
Thank you very much, Luke. And again, you should assume wild applause happening back behind all the names that you're seeing on the screen here. Very interesting, so much that you've packed into there. Maybe we'll start with the question that came from Benji, who's interested in you giving a quick introduction to ethical livestock farming. I don't know
Sure
if there's
enough.
such a thing as a quick introduction, but go ahead.
I thought quick. All right. So first off, we should know that roughly 99% of the pork, 99% of the turkeys, and maybe 87% of the cattle that are sold in America for human consumption are raised in CAFOs. Cattle are just finished in them. The rest of them are live there from start to finish. So the kind of farming that we're doing here is very much in the minority, and it's cute. It looks like what you see, you know, in restaurant brochures and stuff, but it's not the reality. And the reality is CAFOs are the norm. And if you've been to a CAFO, they're run by honest, God-fearing people who go to church. And yet when I see them, even though I respect the people, I can't really respect the quality of life those animals are usually experiencing. And there are plenty of exceptions. There's still small dairies alive in Michigan and so forth. But even those, I think, still could improve on the situation. And so we make it our goal to provide our animals with a number of things, including the freedom to be outside and to engage in natural behaviors like rooting, grazing, hanging out in herds, and then we try to prevent certain kinds of stress, like handling stress, crowding stress, and of course, the health stress that comes from too much indoor. Animals are mostly happier outdoor, and they're much more able to handle it than people would expect. Just to give you an example of that, cattle are basically a giant vat of biology, and they farm little critters inside them that they get their protein from. But the process of doing so produces a lot of excess heat. And so they're always trying to get rid of heat because they're large and they have a, you know, a pretty heavy size to surface area ratio. And so they're always getting rid of heat. Their sweet spot where they're most happy, you know, if they could set the thermostat, it would be about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you look outside and you see cattle with snow on them, you're like, the poor cattle. Like, no, they're finally happy. Anyway, animals like being outside. So I think the big $1 million question is, how can you sort of ethically kill them? Isn't this a new creation? You know, it's not, for me, it's not really about the pain and suffering, because I believe we can offer the animals sort of a better life than they would in the wild. In some ways, a better life than I think most pets get. A lot of pets, I think, live fairly miserable lives in this country, even though they're doted on. But we can offer the animals a relatively pain and stress-free life, but we're still going to kill them and eat them. And that sounds strange, but most farmers, most veterinarians, most people who really interact with the animals in their environment and see the animals not as pets or as anthropomorphized people don't seem to have an issue with it. And let me just use a story to kind of explain the difference. When you have a herd of sheep, one of the things you're worried about is predation. And one of the worst kinds of predation is actually wild dogs. So your neighbor's dogs get out, they come over, and they will chase the sheep, and they'll leave them ripped and bleeding. Dozens of them will be hurt. It takes like 3 days for their stress levels to drop after an incident like that, from what I've read. We haven't had that, but it can be a problem. By contrast, when a natural predator like a wolf or a coyote comes in, they tend to sneak around the edges. They quietly pick off a loner on the outside, often an unhealthy one. They take it down, get out, and from what scientists measured, it seemed like the stress reduction level was about half an hour. They were back to grazing and back to their business. So we want to be like that wolf. We want to sort of take their life in that efficient way and not sort of stress them out and mangle them up. But for us, we see, because we're out here with it, we're out cutting down trees that are 200 years old sometimes, that there are beginnings and there are endings all around us. And from the bacteria dying in our gut to the fact that if I had my choice, I would be composted when I die. The cycle of life is going on, and there's really no way to avoid death. It's going to happen. We all are going to die. The cattle are all going to die. The sheep are all going to die. They're going to procreate, hopefully, and that's what we're in the business of. But we're okay with that death. We just want it to be a clean death, and we want to be able to respect the animal through the process. And so we do. You know, when I have to put down an animal, as I do, it has an element of respect and sort of peace and thankfulness, because their sacrifice allows me to live. So in some ways, we lost something with Noah when animals were given to us to eat. I don't think we can avoid animal death around us, even if we choose to be vegan. They're still going to die. And our bodies and the world seem to work in such a way that it makes sense for us to consume a certain portion of meat. But in that moment with Noah, it was almost a prefiguring, I think, of Jesus, in that something has to die so you can live. And yeah, that's my short story. Short.
Thank you so much. Short, but very thoughtful. So I really appreciate that. Do we have other questions? Would people like to show up on video and unmute themselves and ask some questions?
I'm curious how you ended up getting into the farming industry in itself, and what actually piqued the first interest in your farming journey.
All right, Robin. Well, as I mentioned, it really was a January series lecture that kind of gave me that epiphany moment that this is what I wanted to do. Now, the process of actually starting a business, entrepreneurship, yeah, we did it. It probably could have been done better. It's a learning curve, and it is difficult. We started out going to farmers markets because that really is a way to get your foot in the door. However, I realized, or at least I believed early on, and I still do, that farmers markets weren't where I wanted to be, and that they really couldn't feed America at the level that I wanted to and become a part of the food system. So we started moving into delivery 5 years ago, and that was the right place to be during COVID. Thank you. We did a lot of good business, and we continue to move forward with that. That was Robin's question. I had Benjamin. Provision Family Farms. You can Google us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, the web. If you want to become a customer, that's great. If you want to just learn about us, if you want to plan a visit to the farm or an internship, let me know. Melinda, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious about the spent grain pickup. I'm really fascinated by your use of the spent grains at Harmony and other breweries. So I guess I'm kind of curious what that looks like. Do you have a special vehicle for this, or that, like, do you have to go in a certain amount of time relative to when the grains were used in the brewing process. So like, what does this look like?
Okay, so the spent brewing grains should definitely not be confused with distillers grains, which is something you'll hear people talk about a lot. Distillers grains are the byproduct of ethanol production. They're corn. They have a totally different nutritional profile. And if I was using them, I think many of my customers would be very nervous, my naturally oriented customers, because we do market to a niche crowd. Spent brewing grains are mostly wheat and barley. After they go through the malting process, which is a sort of a fermentation process, and a soaking process, most of the sugar is used up in making the beer, of course, making the alcohol. So what's left behind is the husk and the germ itself, the seed. So the husk is going to be mostly fiber, and the germ is going to be mostly protein. What we're getting is protein and fiber. There's no energy in it, no calories, and it's wet, which makes it sort of less efficient for us. It's about 2/3 water by weight. Now, what they do is they put it, for our system at least, there are bigger systems out there, but for our scale system, they'll put it into these 30-gallon trash barrels and they'll leave it out behind their restaurant. And we try to be there every week. And we go there and we pick them up, we put them in trailers. Maybe we'll need a better solution for when I'm not so young, but the barrels do weigh 200 pounds a piece. We throw them in the trailer, we take them back. And then what we like to do is we like to mix them with primarily just corn, because we need to get the energy in there to get a balanced diet. So we have the fiber, we have the protein. We like to add corn to give it some sugar, a little bit of minerals of various kinds. And if possible, I like to add some animal-based proteins because the protein is not balanced for the purposes here. It needs more things like lysine and methium, which you only tend to get in a few things like mostly animal-based proteins, sometimes from soy. So we, if possible, I'll throw some milk into it or something like that if I have some milk from one of the local grass-fed dairies, some byproduct or waste. But anyway, we'll mix the corn and the beer grain and we'll bring it out to them as a supplement on pasture. However, I do graze my pigs during the growing season. I figure they get about 3/4 of their diet from pasture directly, either mostly from grazing, somewhat from rooting. And the other quarter comes from the feed we bring in, the spent brewing grains. That answer your question, Melinda?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Oh, and volume. We do, before COVID, we were doing maybe 2 to 3 tons a week, wet bay value.
Wow. That's a lot. That's more than I was expecting you to say. A lot more. I mean, it's wet, but still, yeah.
All right, I think I just missed a comment. What did that say, Deanna? I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yep, sorry about that. That's bound to happen at least once. In the chat, there is a question: what kinds of research or scientific studies do you think could give regenerative farming more legitimacy in the scientific community? Can you talk about this more? That's from Natalie.
Sure. And I guess there's 2 kinds of studies. One is ones that would give it more legitimacy and others that would make it more practical. So I could certainly use kinds of studies that are showing what trees would be most useful to me to plant in silvopasture, for example, or what cover crops would be most effective for me to graze pigs on. Those are questions that I've Googled a lot and I've had trouble finding the information I need. In many cases, I just kind of throw a mix together and hope it works. Then there's the kind of studies which legitimize it. And there was an important study recently at White Oak Pastures, which is a very prominent farm in the grass-fed business. And maybe I only heard about it because it supported the kind of things that we like in our periodicals and so forth. But it was showing that the kind of management he was doing with grass-fed rotational grazing of cattle was that he was sequestering carbon, something like half a pound of carbon for every pound of meat that came out of his farm or something like that. And that was good. Now I'm not a generator of scientific studies, so I don't exactly know even what to ask for. But I have seen it's very hard in many ways to measure the kind of farming we do because we have a lot of variables. We like a lot of variables. For example, I like to run cattle, pigs, sheep together in the same herd sometimes makes it harder to quantify things. But nature is pretty diverse, and it doesn't like to be isolated every time. You don't get the same results when you pull things into isolation. So you put me on the spot here, and I don't have a good answer for what kind of studies we need. But I can tell you what kind of policies I think we need.
But I think with the answer that you've given, maybe to some of the people in this audience who may be going on to graduate studies or so, maybe this will inspire them to think of some of the directions that you've just mentioned as well for science.
Thanks, Natalie.
Yeah. So I'm going to just step in here to say that because this is so interesting, we've gone beyond our usual seminar time. So I realize some people have left, other people may have to leave. If you have to, go ahead and do that. But if there are people who still have questions, we'll do the kind of the equivalent of standing around and talking after a seminar. So if you've got questions, kind of stick around for either Luke or for Laurie. Go ahead and unmute yourself and turn your video on and continue to ask those questions.
Hi.
Hey, Laurie.
Hi, Laurie. Looking forward to hearing from you.
I don't have a question. I just want to say, very cool what you do. You sound like a very smart person who loves to learn, and then you also know how to then put it to use. Because I've also, in my master's studies, I learned about all sorts of stuff what you talked about, but that you actually then did it. That is totally cool. So praise, I give you praise.
Thank you, Laurie. I feel really blessed to be able to do what I love.
I had a couple questions, but also a couple of observations. And one of them might be partially an answer to Natalie. And that is that studies of no-till agriculture, which have been going on for 40, 50 years, demonstrate that you can get yields just as high as standard, monocropping with intensive use of chemicals without a lot of that. So that's been well documented. So in a minute, I'd like to hear more about how you establish your covers. You mentioned bunching the animals up, which I get that. I saw it in practice in the 70s when it was being experimented on. But then your plots that you move them from one plot to the next, do you sort of reestablish a cover that you want? Do you drill seeds in? Do you do that sort of stuff? And then I wanted, in passing, I just wanted to make the comment that when I taught introductory geology for many years, I would devote 2 or 3 lectures to soils. And I would tell my students in advance that those were the lectures in which the classes typically went to sleep. They were the lectures that the students found the absolute least interesting, and yet which were probably the geologic processes most close to their survival. So, and I would give them that sermon every time, multiple times over, and they would still fall asleep. It was so annoying. So that's my little personal gripe there. But I would always put in a plug for no-till agriculture in the process. So I'd like to hear more about your practices.
And I'm going to back you up on that. As far as large scale or industrial agriculture is concerned, no-till agriculture is the lowest hanging fruit. It's well studied. We know it works. And so we have both the information and the equipment to make it happen. And I see no reason it shouldn't be more widespread as a means of production within the industrial system. Now, in regards to how we do things, we work almost entirely with perennial pastures. The cost of tilling is ecologically high. It can give you a real value, but it's high. So we work mostly with perennial pastures. But what I will do is if a pasture to me looks a little more damaged, if it happened to rain during the wrong time and they tore it up with their feet, or the pigs rooted it up, I will take that pasture and I will till it to some degree, and then I will plant a cover crop in it using a no-till drill. And so what I like to do in that case is also add as many nutrients as possible. So I frequently try to winter the animals in that place. Okay, here's my favorite success story. All right, I'm going to share it.
This is great.
All right, so we had this one pasture, a meadow really, out back, and it was almost like beach sand. And 3 different years I planted cover crops trying to get something to grow there. Nothing grew more than 8 inches tall. The grass was stunted, and the perennial pastures weren't really worth grazing. And it was going to be a slow, long recovery process. So one summer I went in there and I went ahead and cleared out all the brush, piled it out of the way, moved some rocks out of the way. And then that winter we brought the cattle in and we did bale grazing. You take a round bale and you drop it in a different spot every time. And by the time we were done, we had been through over 100 bales on a 4-acre pasture, and they would have a ring sort of trampled manure and grass seeds and urine. And so I figured we had almost 3/4 of the ground covered in some kind of litter. So then April came, we moved the cattle out to pasture. The grass started growing. The pigs are a little more destructive. I like to hold them in a little longer because if the ground's wet, they'll tear it up. So we put the pigs under this pasture. Now the pigs started flipping over the grass, the hay and so forth, the manure, because they wanted the worms underneath it and because they're just curious. And so they began to incorporate that into the ground and begin a sort of a first grade tilling. And that's usually how my tilling starts, is with pigs plowing. You give them space, they'll graze, you bunch them up and we get them bored and they'll start rooting. So we bunched them up, left them in the pasture for more than a month. They tore it all to pieces, which was okay because there was nothing there worth saving anyway. And then I went through and I disked it once or twice. That's the only tillage I really do, is disking. And then I got my no-till seeder and I planted a cover crop of 30 or 40 different species in there. There's places I can order pre-mixes from, or mixes, custom mixes that give you as many species as you want. It's a great resource. It's called Green Mix or Smart Mix. Yeah, Green Smart Mix Calculator. You can look it up online, but you can put whatever you want in there and they'll give you recommendations for your time frame and your environment and your goals and so forth. It's pretty cool. But anyway, so I ordered this mix. It grew up 3.5 feet tall. I let it grow all summer instead of just grazing in the spring. In the fall, I came through and grazed it. And the next year, when the perennial started coming up for the first time, I had grass and it was 1.5 foot tall, and I was happy. So all that happened in basically 6 months by getting a lot of nutrients on the land, using tillage and to incorporate the nutrients, and then using plants to grab those nutrients. If you don't get living plant roots to grab those nutrients, just because you incorporated them doesn't mean they're going to stay. They're going to oxidize or they're going to leach. You got to get plants to grab them. When the plants grab them, then you get a shot at keeping them there and building something worth having.
And can you tell me, kind of off the top of your head, like what are the sort of 6 or 8 major cover forages that occur in your mixes? Is it stuff like alfalfa and timothy and that sort of thing, or what?
No, alfalfa, not really. It's more of it's a 3 or 4 year crop, and it's not a real aggressive annual. What you're looking for in these annual cover crops is something that's just going to be really aggressive grower. So my number one plant is a sorghum Sudan hybrid. If you're familiar with Sudan grass, you know it's very sweet, very tall, very aggressive grower, and it relies on a C4 carbon type photosynthesis instead of a C3, so it's a warm season crop. And that's why we do plant that more like in late May, more when the corn is being planted than say early. So that's gonna be a number one. Then we're gonna want we're gonna want broadleafs, because we want plants from every class. We're gonna want legumes, and we're gonna get some more the winter annual stuff kind of too. So there'll be some more winter annual stuff like some ryegrass or something, also an aggressive grower, real good root formation. There's going to be brassicas in there. We love having, that's probably my number 2 plant, is getting brassicas, either like a rape or a turnip in there. There's definitely going to be various clovers, some of the annual clovers. So I have tons of red clover already growing on the farm, but I'm looking for something more like a Ladino clover or a crimson clover if it's a little wet or acidic. So we're going to get some clover, and then we're going to, I'd say the clovers, the grasses like the rye family, rye, oats, wheat, and then the warm season grasses, and then the brassicas are sort of my main areas.
So these are mostly annuals and they reseed themselves then?
Some do, most don't. It doesn't really matter. The perennial forage is in there waiting to come.
Okay.
Something will grow if you give it the space, in my experience. But it gives me a real heavy growth for a year that I can graze with the Sudan grass 3 or 4 times if we get good rain. And then a lot of those, the ryegrass and the Sudan grass both have really heavy root building, so that's going to leave me good soil fertility and break up compaction.
Do you ever try something like, say, drilling in corn seed in your pasture lands, so you have that mixed into what the cows graze on, or is that
I have
just
experimented
too
with that,
crazy?
yes.
Mhm.
Corn it puts on similar growth to the Sudex. It's a fine grazing crop, but you only get one pass. It does not regrow after grazing.
Right.
And so that's, I can use that, but then it's sort of a one-shot wonder at the end of the year, which comes in handy, but not as often.
We have a hand up by Nathaniel. So Nathaniel, if you've got a question.
I don't know if I had my hand up, but
Anyway,
yeah, although I did want to ask Luke, could these regenerative farming strategies that you use in Michigan be adapted to help poor farmers improve their agricultural techniques in third world countries? Could these third world farmers potentially get the resources they need to perform this farming?
And in some ways, you got it, but it's entirely backwards. If you look at places like India, most of the food is produced by smallholders. In fact, most of the world's food is produced by small farms, not large farms. What we have in Germany, what we have in the United States, Canada, England makes up 30% of the world's food production. The other 70% comes from small farms. The problem is those small farms still are not producing good quality incomes for the people, and they're not always producing good ecological results either. So yes, they're on the one hand, they do have small farms all over the world. On the other hand, we do have knowledge and resources that could be brought and used in those places. And my area of expertise is with animals more than crops. The last thing I would want to do is go somewhere where I don't know the environment, I don't know the people, and I don't know the markets and tell them how to farm. I would want to be very careful about that. But what we know about and what we've learned about managing animals for grazing has potential all over the world to improve soils and hopefully to get people living wage farming jobs producing the world's food. Maybe someday I'll get close to that, but not now.
So you raise sheep. Do you market some of the wool from the sheep as well, or not?
Well, not. It's not. If you're in the sheep wool business, it's a bit of a different animal, and it's a small and shrinking business due to synthetics. So it's we started out with whatever sheep we bought because we didn't know at the time, and we've been breeding away from having any wool at all, so we don't have to pay for shearing. There's shearing your sheep is almost a net zero value product.
Wow.
So yeah, no wool.
Would you encourage people to go into an industry that would encourage shearing to be valuable then, to use a product that we already have?
Well, I try not to push a chain. It seems like a kind of not a real low hanging fruit in improving the world's sort of ecological and economic situations. So if people like using wool, that's fine. If nylon works better for them, that's fine. There's only so much nylon in the world, but there's an awful lot of it if we're not using it to fuel our cars. So there's other places I think where I'm more interested. I'm interested in them supporting local farmers. It'd be nice if it was sort of economically easy to compete in this kind of business, but we do depend on people who value what we do enough to pay extra for it. So I encourage people to support local farms. I encourage people to find ways to reuse any kind of waste around them. But we're looking at the bigger waste. That's why we're doing, 30 barrels of beer grain, and not always we're piddling on small stuff, because we can get kind of hung up on that, and that can be a fun hobby, but it's not a good business practice.
We have a hand up from Lisa, who might be Natalie. I'm not sure.
Lisa, did you have a question?
I did not. I'm not sure who the handout came from, but this is actually not Natalie. It's Natalie's mom, and she told me that this would be really neat. So
Good notes for her.
Excellent.
anyway,
Since I seem to be randomly picking people that I think have hands up and they don't have their hands up, I think I'll stop just picking names there. Are there other questions out here? Well, I think maybe then I will just formally thank both Luke and Laurie for talking with us today. Thank you to the audience members also for asking all these questions. It's been such an interesting time in the seminar, both to learn from what you were both talking about, but also to learn from the questions that resulted from that. If any of the students, if you need some of the links to things that have been talked about or have been posted, I'm happy to share them with you. I'll post them for the seminar class, but if you're not in the seminar class, just email me directly for some of those links. But thank you very much, Luke, and thank you, Laurie, for spending this time and sharing this time with us.